Cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet, with pay-as-you-go pricing. Instead of buying, owning, and maintaining physical data centers and servers, you can access technology services such as computing power, storage, and databases on an as-needed basis from a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services. Organizations of every type, size, and industry are using the cloud for a wide variety of use cases, such as data backup, disaster recovery, email, virtual desktops, software development and testing, big data analytics, and customer-facing web applications. For example, healthcare companies are using the cloud to develop more personalized treatments for patients. Financial services companies are using the cloud to power real-time fraud detection and prevention. And video game makers are using the cloud to deliver online games to millions of players around the world. With cloud computing, your business can become more agile, reduce costs, instantly scale, and deploy globally in minutes. Cloud computing gives you instant access to a broad range of technologies so you can innovate faster and build nearly anything you can imagine. From infrastructure services such as compute, storage, and databases, to Internet of Things, machine learning, data analytics, and much more. You can deploy technology services in a matter of minutes and get from idea to implementation several orders of magnitude faster than before. This gives you the freedom to experiment and test new ideas to differentiate customer experiences and transform your business, such as adding machine learning and intelligence to your applications in order to personalize experiences for your customers and improve their engagement. You don't need to make large upfront investments in hardware and overpay for capacity you don't use. Instead, you can trade capital expense for variable expense and only pay for IT as you consume it. With cloud computing, you access resources from the cloud in real time, as they're needed. You can scale these resources up and down to grow or shrink capacity instantly as your business needs change. Cloud computing also makes it easy to expand to new regions and deploy globally in minutes. For example, Amazon Web Services has infrastructure all over the world, so you're able to deploy your application in multiple physical locations in just a few clicks. Putting applications in closer proximity to end users reduces latency and improves their experience. No matter your location, size, or industry, the cloud frees you from managing infrastructure and data centers so you can focus on what matters most to your business. AWS is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. Millions of customers trust AWS to power their infrastructure and applications. Organizations of every type and size are using AWS to lower costs, become more agile, and innovate faster. AWS provides on-demand delivery of technology services via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. You can use these services to build and run virtually any type of application without upfront costs or ongoing commitments. You only pay for what you use. AWS gives you more services and more features within those services than any other cloud provider. This makes it faster, easier, and more cost-effective to move your existing applications to the cloud and to build anything you can imagine. From infrastructure technologies like compute, storage, and databases, to emerging technologies such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, data lakes and analytics, and Internet of Things. Building on AWS means you can choose the right tool for the job. For example, AWS offers the widest variety of databases that are purpose-built for different types of applications. With AWS, you can leverage the latest technologies to experiment and innovate more quickly. We are continually accelerating our pace of innovation to invent entirely new technologies you can use to transform your business. Like pioneering the serverless computing space with the launch of AWS Lambda, which lets developers run their code without provisioning or managing servers. And AWS built Amazon SageMaker, a fully managed machine learning service that empowers everyday developers and scientists to use machine learning without any previous experience. We are constantly expanding our global network of AWS regions, so you can access AWS services to build and run your applications from anywhere in the world. Each of these regions has multiple availability zones that are physically separated from each other and connected by low latency, high throughput, and highly redundant networking. This makes it easy to design and operate applications that are scalable, fault-tolerant, and highly available. Our infrastructure is built to satisfy the security standards of the most risk-sensitive organizations. You also have access to the AWS Partner Network, which has thousands of systems integrators who specialize in AWS services, and tens of thousands of independent software vendors who adapt their technology to work on AWS. With the largest community of customers across every industry, AWS has unmatched experience and operational expertise you can depend upon for your most important applications and every imaginable use case. Cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet, with pay-as-you-go pricing. Instead of buying, owning, and maintaining physical data centers and servers, you can access technology services such as computing power, storage, and databases on an as-needed basis from a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services. Organizations of every type, size, and industry are using the cloud for a wide variety of use cases, such as data backup, disaster recovery, email, virtual desktops, software development and testing, big data analytics, and customer-facing web applications. For example, healthcare companies are using the cloud to develop more personalized treatments for patients. Financial services companies are using the cloud to power real-time fraud detection and prevention. And video game makers are using the cloud to deliver online games to millions of players around the world. With cloud computing, your business can become more agile, reduce costs, instantly scale, and deploy globally in minutes. Cloud computing gives you instant access to a broad range of technologies so you can innovate faster and build nearly anything you can imagine. From infrastructure services such as compute, storage, and databases, to Internet of Things, machine learning, data analytics, and much more. You can deploy technology services in a matter of minutes and get from idea to implementation several orders of magnitude faster than before. This gives you the freedom to experiment and test new ideas to differentiate customer experiences and transform your business, such as adding machine learning and intelligence to your applications in order to personalize experiences for your customers and improve their engagement. You don't need to make large upfront investments in hardware and overpay for capacity you don't use. Instead, you can trade capital expense for variable expense and only pay for IT as you consume it. With cloud computing, you access resources from the cloud in real time, as they're needed. You can scale these resources up and down to grow or shrink capacity instantly as your business needs change. Cloud computing also makes it easy to expand to new regions and deploy globally in minutes. For example, Amazon Web Services has infrastructure all over the world, so you're able to deploy your application in multiple physical locations in just a few clicks. Putting applications in closer proximity to end users reduces latency and improves their experience. No matter your location, size, or industry, the cloud frees you from managing infrastructure and data centers so you can focus on what matters most to your business. AWS is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform. Millions of customers trust AWS to power their infrastructure and applications. Organizations of every type and size are using AWS to lower costs, become more agile, and innovate faster. AWS provides on-demand delivery of technology services via the internet with pay-as-you-go pricing. You can use these services to build and run virtually any type of application without upfront costs or ongoing commitments. You only pay for what you use. AWS gives you more services and more features within those services than any other cloud provider. This makes it faster, easier, and more cost-effective to move your existing applications to the cloud and to build anything you can imagine. From infrastructure technologies like compute, storage, and databases, to emerging technologies such as machine learning and artificial intelligence, data lakes and analytics, and Internet of Things. Building on AWS means you can choose the right tool for the job. For example, AWS offers the widest variety of databases that are purpose-built for different types of applications. With AWS, you can leverage the latest technologies to experiment and innovate more quickly. We are continually accelerating our pace of innovation to invent entirely new technologies you can use to transform your business. Like pioneering the serverless computing space with the launch of AWS Lambda, which lets developers run their code without provisioning or managing servers. And AWS built Amazon SageMaker, a fully managed machine learning service that empowers everyday developers and scientists to use machine learning without any previous experience. We are constantly expanding our global network of AWS regions, so you can access AWS services to build and run your applications from anywhere in the world. Each of these regions has multiple availability zones that are physically separated from each other and connected by low latency, high throughput, and highly redundant networking. This makes it easy to design and operate applications that are scalable, fault-tolerant, and highly available. Our infrastructure is built to satisfy the security standards of the most risk-sensitive organizations. You also have access to the AWS Partner Network, which has thousands of systems integrators who specialize in AWS services, and tens of thousands of independent software vendors who adapt their technology to work on AWS. With the largest community of customers across every industry, AWS has unmatched experience and operational expertise you can depend upon for your most important applications and every imaginable use case. Cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet, with pay-as-you-go pricing. Instead of buying, owning, and maintaining physical data centers and servers, you can access technology services such as computing power, storage, and databases on an as-needed basis from a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services. Organizations of every type, size, and industry are using the cloud for a wide variety of use cases, such as data backup, disaster recovery, email, virtual desktops, software development and testing, big data analytics, and customer-facing web applications. For example, healthcare companies are using the cloud to develop more personalized treatments for patients. Financial services companies are using the cloud to power real-time fraud detection and prevention. And video game makers are using the cloud to deliver online games to millions of players around the world. With cloud computing, your business can become more agile, reduce costs, instantly scale, and deploy globally in minutes. Cloud computing gives you instant access to a broad range of technologies so you can innovate faster and build nearly anything you can imagine. From infrastructure services such as compute, storage, and databases, to Internet of Things, machine learning, data analytics, and much more. You can deploy technology services in a matter of minutes and get from idea to implementation several orders of magnitude faster than before. This gives you the freedom to experiment and test new ideas to differentiate customer experiences and transform your business, such as adding machine learning and intelligence to your applications in order to personalize experiences for your customers and improve their engagement. You don't need to make large upfront investments in hardware and overpay for capacity you don't use. Instead, you can trade capital expense for variable expense and only pay for IT as you consume it. With cloud computing, you access resources from the cloud in real time as they're needed. You can scale these resources up and down to grow or shrink capacity instantly as your business needs change. Cloud computing also makes it easy to expand to new regions and deploy globally in minutes. For example, Amazon Web Services has infrastructure all over the world, so you're able to deploy your application in multiple physical locations in just a few clicks. Putting applications in closer proximity to end users reduces latency and improves their experience. No matter your location, size, or industry, the cloud frees you from managing infrastructure and data centers so you can focus on what matters most to your business.
Hello, good day to everyone.
Hello, good evening once again in another episode of
Good
our
evening.
anniversary here at Pilipinas. My name is Michael Lance, and
And I'm Agusito de Guzman, the community lead for PWA Pilipinas. And before we begin, we'll be introducing our organization first. Okay. Okay. So we are PWA Pilipinas. We are a community for progressive web app makers, designers, and users here in the Philippines. Okay. So our mission is to introduce and nurture progressive web apps development and adoption in the Philippines and beyond by fostering a community for subject matter experts, enthusiasts, adopters, and developers of the platform, and by providing you resources and engagements just like this to stimulate interest in progressive web apps and the web. Because our vision is that progressive web apps would be adopted widely here in the Philippines. But wait, what's that progressive web apps I'm talking about? Well, PWAs or progressive web apps are your web applications but are supercharged with native app-like features like having the ability to be installed, work offline, and work across different form factors. Well, with that, thank you for 2 amazing years. Thank you for joining us here at PWA Pilipinas, and we do hope that you would join us in the next years ahead. And with that, since we're celebrating our anniversary, we do have different talks within August. So we started with the basics last August 7 to 14, and we also have the advanced ones. So from August 18 until the 28th. So we are now at the third talk. So last August 18 we had Workbox 6. August 21 we had the power of micro front end. That was yesterday. Today we'll be having SEO for web developers, and on the 28th we have 2 topics. We have real-time web applications with SignalR and containerized deployment for your SPA, single page application, and API. Okay, so we're to watch all of our events and get the latest updates. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. If you wanted to join our Discord server, we also have that. Just visit bit.ly/pwa-discord. And yeah, if you do want to watch the previous videos or previous talks, you can just simply visit our PWA Pilipinas app that is available by visiting app.pwapilipinas.org. And if you have an Android device, you can just get it on Google Play, and it's also on the Microsoft Store. We also have our Facebook page, Facebook group, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. So for updates, just make sure to visit those. We also have our website. Okay, so I'm going to introduce our speaker first. So our speaker is Jordan M. Adler. He is a software engineering manager on the SDK team at OneSignal. Previously, Jordan evolved engineering productivity at Cruise. He's also the lead API platform engineer at Pinterest and was a strategic partner, engineer, and developer advocate at Google, where he managed technical partnership between major organizations and Google and drove the evolution of developer ecosystems. So, welcome. Let's welcome on stage our speaker for tonight, today, wherever you are in the world, here at the Pilipinas. So, hello.
Hello, good morning. How are you doing?
We're doing great. Good
Glad to
morning.
hear it. It's
It's a little
7
bit
a.m. here in San
evening
Francisco,
here.
which
Yeah.
is a lovely time. Just got to see the sunrise, and now I'm hanging out with a couple
Yeah.
new friends and get to talk to some developers about SEO, which is always a fun time.
Okay, so I guess we can begin so that our community can learn about SEO.
Sounds great. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. Okay, can you all see the screen okay? Presentation looks good?
Yes, it looks
Yeah.
great.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Let's take a few moments to talk about SEO for web developers. Just to give you a sense of what we'll cover, I'll talk a bit about kind of SEO broadly, web vitals kind of at a high level, and then we'll go into page experience, the different signals that are used for page experience, some of the history around it, and how that's changed over the years and how that might change in the future. We'll talk a bit about feature inclusion, which is a little bit orthogonal to page experience, but an important part of making sure that you're getting the most out of your integration with Google Search. And then we'll do a deep dive into core web vitals, which are really an important set of signals around page performance. And the importance of page performance in SEO is really the area where web developers like yourselves can add the most value to the websites that you're working on. We'll go over some tools, and I'll show you some of the different tools that you can use. Lighthouse, of course, is going to be a key part of that, and I'll open the floor to any questions at the end. A bit about me. My name is Jordan M. Adler. I'm the head of developer engineering over at OneSignal. In the past, as noted, I've worked at Pinterest and at Cruise and at Google. At Google, I worked closely with the Chrome and Search team as part of the strategic partner engineering organization. And today we'll be talking SEO, just to give you kind of a high level of what SEO is or how I think about it. I really think about it as kind of 4 distinct parts or kind of components that you can optimize for. The first one is content. Obviously, if you have specific keywords that you're looking to rank against, you'll want to make sure that you're producing content that's useful and interesting to Google search users for those keywords. That's not something we'll cover in this talk. I mean, that's a huge conversation, certainly, content. We'll focus on some of the others, which include indexability. Actually, we won't be talking too much about indexability. Indexability is really about some of the technical components that prevent your site or your content from being indexed. Oftentimes, those could include things like sitemaps, robots.txt, some of the more infrastructural components of serving to Google. Our focus can be on these last 2. So page experience, which is really about a set of signals that Google uses to say, okay, is this web page a better experience from a technical perspective on the user than alternatives for this particular keyword? So we'll talk a bit about how to optimize those signals. And then feature inclusion. So oftentimes with Google and with other search engines, you might search for a particular thing. You'll get a list of, the 10 blue links, a list of results, but there'll also be additional features on the page that are not specifically related to those, maybe a little kind of recipes carousel, or, if you're searching for a famous person, a notable person, you might have a little information box. And as a web developer, you can expose information to Google to ensure that your content is able to be included in those specific features. A huge part of considerations for search engine optimization is going to be performance. And the Google Chrome developer team has put together this website around Web Vitals in particular, which talk about some of the different metrics that you can use to measure performance. I'll cover some of them here, and in particular, a small set called the Core Web Vitals, which are kind of the 3 most important ones that can dictate your site's performance in a way that's understandable in the Google search formula. First, a bit of history. There's a website called SEO Moz, and they provide a kind of a backlog of Google's algorithmic update history. The most recent changes are kind of always listed at the top. Sometimes they're speculative. Google doesn't always confirm the changes that they make. Sometimes they don't always share the specific details of the changes that they make, right? Oftentimes they're trying to take bad actors and remove them from the content. And so they'll make changes and not necessarily share the specifics of the changes that they're making, in part because they don't want to, inform those bad actors. And so a lot of the information, unfortunately, is necessarily a bit obscured and opaque, and we don't have all the best kinds of more clarity or transparency that maybe would enable us to be more effective. But SEO Moz has kind of put together, for the folks who are kind of in this field and being conscious of it, and being intentional and scientific about it, some resources around their observations. And there's a few I want to highlight here just over the past, kind of working backwards. And the first big one would be in 2015, there was an update called Mobilegeddon. And Mobilegeddon was really about making search more mobile friendly, right? So you can remember 2015, Google was in the process of kind of transitioning from a very desktop centric world that existed in Google's creation to an increasingly mobile world. In particular in the US, as a heavy user of desktop computing, and kind of an early adopter of that technology, it was much more widespread. And so some of that mobile friendliness, frankly, came a little late to the US market. And so this was really in consideration around 2015 is when this kind of rolled out. There was quite a bit of tweaks, right? So in this case, and I think some of the other ones that we'll talk about, Google would try to make a change, realize that, hey, maybe this wasn't the right approach, roll the change back a little bit or reduce the weight of the change that they made. And so the mobile friendly 2 is kind of an update, which, is another signal boost that kind of re-emphasizes some of the mobile friendliness. In 2018, Google took it a step further by rolling out what they call the mobile first index. And basically what that means is when Google looks at specific, URLs, i.e. pages for a particular keyword, they'll want to, or a query, I should say, they'll want to, use the mobile first index, or like the index that is gathered based on mobile user agents, so a mobile version of Googlebot as opposed to the desktop version of Googlebot. And so using the signals that come from the mobile version of Googlebot as opposed to desktop enables Google to even more kind of emphasize the mobile experience, which was critical during this kind of mobile rollout process. And indeed, mobile speed came out a little bit later, kind of focusing more on mobile performance. So let's talk a bit about some of the page experience signals. First, you can kind of look at all of this stuff on the Google Search Console, Google Search Essentials documentation. So I would highly recommend taking a look at that documentation. It's very well organized and talks about the specific things, and there's a lot of details here. I'll try and give you an overview in this talk, and hopefully that'll enable you to better review that material and make it effective and actionable. But if you look at the actual page signals, really there are a set of things, these core web vitals, which are relatively new. They were, there was a recent mobile friendliness update to Google Search, which was really emphasizing these core web vitals. And that's kind of a huge predication of why I'm here today to talk to you folks, is because this core web vitals change is really critical to, I think, web developers and ensuring that we're providing the best possible experience for Google Search users and our users as well. Prior to those core web vitals, there were 4 kind of page experience signals: mobile friendly in kind of an opaque way, which talks about some of those things that I noted before, and we'll dig into that briefly. Safe browsing, HTTPS, and no intrusive interstitials. Firstly, core web vitals. At the top, I'll dig into these deeper, but at the top, largest contentful paint, which really is about, how long does it take to load the big load of the gradual loading process, right? So loading is not, a Boolean process. It's linear, it's gradual. And so the largest contentful paint is the point at which, the bulk of it comes into view. The first input delay, which is really about kind of when a user begins to interact with a page, how long does it take to respond to that? So it's all about responsiveness. So if largest contentful paint is all about loading, first input delay is all about responsiveness. And cumulative layout shift is all about what's called visual stability. And that previously used to be called Jank. And basically what that is if you move on something on the page, does the page move out from under you as components load, or does the overall layout of the page stay static as components load? They just fill in the blanks as opposed to move the blanks around as well. And then mobile friendliness, there's a mobile friendly testing tool you can use to look at that, and we'll dig into some of that as well. These other signals, safe browsing, really is about security issues, right? If your domain was hijacked by a malware actor, you could find yourself in a position where these safe browsing signals are flipped to something negative, right? Something that says, hey, this is not a safe site to browse. But for the most part, that's not. I assume everyone here is doing good attempts to keep their domain secure, and not producing or serving content that is intrinsically malicious, like social engineering or phishing or something like that. HTTPS, again, making sure your site is served over HTTPS. That's really critical, something Google has really been pushing on over the past decade, and I think really important. And then finally, no intrusive interstitials, which is really about a particular anti-pattern that Google was trying to avoid. As long as you don't have those intrusive interstitials, you'll be fine there. And then finally, there's kind of feature inclusion. It's sometimes called structured data or search appearance. And so structured data is really, you can kind of think of it as a bit of JSON blob, although it doesn't have to be in JSON, kind of a JSON blob from an organization called schema.org, kind of manages this kind of structured data as part of the web. And then Google uses components of these for specific kinds of features. And you can see some examples here. Articles is a very common one. Logo for businesses. You can kind of say, hey, I'm the authoritative domain for this business, and here's my business logo. So if someone Googles your particular business, they'll be able to see kind of the logo there that'll be eligible for inclusion in that feature if it's triggered by Google. Q&A and recipes and so on. So here's some examples of the treatments and what they look like. So on the left here, we have different types: recipe, review snippets, site link search box, and software apps as an example. And on the right here, you can see how that appears on Google. And these are not exactly the same as kind of the 10 blue links that you see on the page. Sometimes they're a little bit of information, sometimes specifically on mobile, and sometimes they're on desktop as well, but they're kind of in different settings and different views. And so this enables you to kind of expose that information to Google so that it can provide a more rich search experience. And usually that requires structured data. That does require structured data. Usually that's in the form of what's called JSON LD. And you can see an example of JSON LD here. And this is and you can note here context schema.org that refers to the standardization body schema.org that deals with these specifications. And here it's a recipe. So you can go to schema.org/recipe and you'll see the specific format that schema.org uses. And if you go to the Google site, you'll see what elements that they will use and not use. There are other organizations besides Google Search that use structured data and use, in particular, schema.org structured data. There are other search engines as well as cases where, with social sites, where they might have open graph data, or I think Twitter has specific kinds of data. And so those are really about presentation on those settings. And so a modern, maximally feature-rich and integrated a web application will often have multiple bits of structured data, so that when that URL is exposed on different kinds of platforms, it's exposed in a way that kind of looks great to the user and really demonstrates the value of the page and encourages people to click through. And let's dig into core web vitals a bit. The first one I'll talk about here is cumulative layout shift. So I mentioned before, a layout shift is any time where the visible element changes from one position to another between rendered frames, right? Ideally, when you do the page layout and then the paint, so as part of the rendering process for a browser, first you kind of lay out the page, so you put all the elements into position, and then you paint it, so you kind of take each element and actually paint the pixels on the screen. And if there's new information coming in through a stream of content because it kind of renders constantly as it's loading from the page, then a layout shift could occur if there are changes to the DOM, or if kind of there aren't hints to the DOM or to the browser that certain kinds of elements will be in a particular place and with particular kinds of dimensions. Cumulative layout shift is a metric that measures layout shift during user interaction sessions on the page. So as you're tapping on the page, you might have a layout shift of 0.1 or something like that happen multiple times. So that can accumulate and become something much more significant, right? So this used to be called jank or jitteriness, kind of as you scroll through the page. It's very common, folks may recall, as you scroll through the page. In some websites, you'll see kind of the page jump around. That's really what's trying to be measured here. Largest contentful paint is kind of that point in the loading cycle where the bulk of the content comes on screen. And you can see here on the right, we have a timeline, right? Our first paint comes in at 3.3 seconds, which is really just kind of a little spacer for the header bar. At 3.8 seconds, we get the first contentful paint, right? So it's not just spacing or placeholder elements, but it's actually a bit of text, in this case, a Trello board. And then, it's not until 14.5 seconds in that the largest contentful paint comes in. And that's when the bulk of the page is rendered, or the most significant components of the page is rendered. And so it's defined as the time until completion of rendering of the largest image or text block visible within the viewport, right? So viewport, again, we're really taking a mobile first approach here. You can think of it on your screen. So the viewport is on your phone screen. How long did it take for the biggest possible block of that based on the DOM to load relative to when you first started? And it's really intended to measure wait time, right? Initial load time. Here's some more examples of how first contentful paint and largest contentful paint can be different, right? So at the top here, you have Instagram. Your first contentful paint comes in really quickly. Instagram has this little loading screen with a nice little logo. And then they load some of the boilerplate for the page. And it's not until that image actually is, that you can see kind of in dash green there, the Instagram logo, that is the largest image or block of text on the page. And so the largest contentful paint comes in kind of 3 frames in this timeline when that page comes in the screen. And then on the bottom here, you'll see Google search. The first contentful paint comes in right away, and you can see these kind of elements loaded onto the page, kind of UI elements for browsing Google search itself. These are things that never change. And so you can imagine Google search, if it were PWA in this case, might have these elements cached and can kind of render them immediately. And then the next screen, you can see largest contentful paint. And what I'll call out here is the kind of the green dash here is that text. That's the largest contentful component. It's not the images in the carousel, which load later. Another interesting thing to call out is you'll notice the search query Larry Page on the bottom left. So kind of the first screen. And then the next screen, if you'll see immediately to the right of that, so you have Larry Page coming in here, and you can see underneath it these little tabs for the different kinds of results that you might want to pull up. Maybe you want to pull up all results or images, videos, news, and so on. And actually, you can see on the next element of the timeline, Google has understood Larry Page to be kind of a newsy query, and so it's reordered these a bit. You can see news is all the way to the left, just past all now, and then images after that. And so what that suggests to me is that, this bit on the left here, this kind of first contentful paint comes into view probably without the information as to whether or not this is a newsy query or what kind of ordering might want to be done on those tabs. And so again, if this were PWA, there'd probably be a service worker managing a cache that can kind of render all this quickly. And so you're able to expose more to the user more quickly and also break down the page so that the largest contentful paint is kind of in an element that you would be able to load quickly. And so you can kind of optimize for that component. And then finally, first input delay, again, intended to measure responsiveness. So if you've loaded a page and then you tap on something, it measures the time from kind of that tap of some element and until like rendering is completed for whatever action is taken based on your tapping on that element. Time to interactive is a part of first input delay. It's an important tranche, and we'll get into kind of breaking this down in a second, because there's a lot of like sub metrics, right? So we have these 3 core web vitals, and those kind of came out of evolution over different attempts at kind of quantifying these. And I'm sure some of you may have heard of historical iterations of this. But time to interactive is an important slice of that. And that measures the end-to-end time from page load to the response to the first inputs. That includes kind of, initial page load as well as the first input delay. So here's a bit of a timeline for you here. And you can see here we have the main thread at the bottom. And then the first contentful paint occurs from navigation start to the point where styles are loaded and browser can paint content. So it has enough information to begin to do the layout and paint, which it does kind of cycles, right? Layout, paint, change, layout, paint, and so on. And you can see the network requests coming in, right? Sometimes these are grouped up as the browser knows, hey, we've got our index.html. That index.html page, refers to, let's say, 3 different remote style sheets or JavaScript components. We'll fetch those. And as we fetched, you can see the second one of those, it refers to another resource we need to load, which is this kind of bottom 4th bit on the network request. And if you follow that to the end, you'll notice that the actual timed interactive doesn't complete until that loading is complete, right? So let's jump down to the bottom here. as components are requested from the network and received, the main thread kind of executes on particular tasks, and the first input delay occurs from the time the browser receives the first user input, which happens about half the way through final loading. Then the actual response doesn't occur until that main thread is complete processing and renders the page. And so that's the part that's first input delay. And you'll notice, by the way, it does not necessarily wait for the main thread to be complete. In fact, at the end, you'll see the main thread does go idle at some point because there's nothing to respond to, and all the kind of initial page load execution has occurred, and all the cascading components have occurred as well. So now that you've got a sense of the different kinds of things to be considerate of and the different metrics that you can use to measure your site's performance, let's talk about some of the tooling. First and foremost, Google Search Console is great. You'll be able to click on this page experience bit once you've set up Google Search Console, and it'll give you kind of page experience signals, Core Web Vitals, mobile usability, HTTPS, for all the URLs that are available on the host name that you select. And then, digging into Core Web Vitals specifically, there's actually lots of different ways that you can measure Core Web Vitals. So PageSpeed Insights is one of them. That's a website that's available easily on the web. There's the Chrome UX report, so that calculates based on actual field data from Chrome. You can see that data in Search Console. You can see it in PageSpeed Insights. You can also see it in BigQuery, and there's a specific API and dashboard for it as well. And so that looks at actual field metric data, which is going to be different necessarily than the lab data that you might collect from PageSpeed Insights or from Search Console. Search Console is nice because it gives you kind of a domain or hostname wide view. You can look at Core Web Vitals, not just on a particular page, but across your whole site and identify and target specific pages. Chrome DevTools has kind of Lighthouse built into it. Lighthouse also exists in a number of different mechanisms that you can execute it, including a Chrome extension, as well as kind of CLI tooling. There are some constraints around first input delay. They're only able to capture the total blocking time, which is kind of a specific tranche of first input delay, not the whole thing, due to technical constraints. And then the Web Vitals extension, which is kind of really focused on these three signals, and so that's well exposed. So PageSpeed Insights, I'll kind of quickly show you here. This is a page on our One Signal site. And you can see at the top here is field data. This is from the Chrome UX report and talks about kind of these four signals here: first contentful paint and largest contentful paint, both part of that kind of initial loading time, as well as first input delay and cumulative layout shift. So those are exposed here from the Chrome UX report. And then underneath that, you can see lab data. Those are the elements that are actually measured when this was executed. And if you can see it towards the top, you'll have a mobile and a desktop view. So for each of these, you can kind of see and look what's best for you. There's also Google Search Console again. So I'm just going to go back a couple slides here. This is the Page Experience tab. If you click on Core Web Vitals over on the left-hand side, or Core Web Vitals kind of in the center here, where it says 95 failed URLs, you'll get pulled into this page, which kind of does the breakdown for you on a per URL basis. You can open the report and say, okay, which URLs need improvement, which ones kind of need drastic improvement, and help kind of target your work. So this is definitely a great place to start. Finally, you can use Lighthouse, run it yourself in the Google Chrome DevTools or in other ways. And it'll provide some of the same performance signals from PageSpeed Insights. It'll also provide information about progressive web app functionality, things like, are you having a web app manifest? Are you loading offline well, and so on. I'm going to go ahead and take this time to just quickly run through a Chrome DevTools report on the New York Times here. So what I've done, I'm going to go ahead and close this. So I've loaded New York Times in Chrome, and I'm going to go ahead and go to More Tools, Developer Tools in this Overflow menu here in Chrome. And usually it might pop up in this Element or Console tab. You'll want to jump all the way over to Lighthouse. And you can search for specific categories. I'm going to go ahead and enable SEO, best practices, PWA, And then device, we'll want to focus on mobile, and I'll go ahead and click generate report. It's going to take a bit of time. And what it's doing now is it's loading the page, again, because I've selected mobile, it's loading the page in kind of a mobile view here. And actually, I believe it does some throttling too. So the performance that it emulates is not the performance that my computer is capable of. I'm a decent network connection here. But it'll actually kind of throttle that performance and make sure that we're using a relatively consistent or a common mobile experience, which is necessarily going to be different than what you expect on a desktop machine with a network connection. A few things to call out here, of course, because you have Chrome extensions, you're running this in Chrome, you have pages in Chrome, right? All of this can impact your Lighthouse scoring, so just keep that in mind. But we'll go block by block here. First, on the performance side, we have metrics. So time to interactive, cumulative layout shift, and largest contentful paint are called out here. And then the kind of the green, yellow, red talk about specific benchmarks. For what it's worth, the benchmarks are relatively aggressive. I mean, I think they're worth hitting, but some of them, cumulative layout shift, you should be able to minimize quite easily. Time to interactive and largest contentful paint. I think some of the expectations there are quite aggressive, which is great. But lots of people are going to be able to get, largest contentful paint down to, let's say, 4 seconds, which is actually pretty good, but might be considered red by Chrome because they're really trying to kind of move the ecosystem forward. You can go ahead and click on View Original Trace, and that'll pull up the trace in the Performance tab of DevTools. I won't go into this because there's a lot here, but this is a great resource to dig in and see how you can specifically improve performance. And it'll call out specific opportunities as well. So particularly any unused third-party JavaScript, very actionable kind of, here's some off-screen images that could have had their loading deferred, right? So that means that the loading would not have been blocked before paint. And so that can improve. And I think it'll even call out the specific metrics. It doesn't do that here. Sometimes it'll call out the specific metrics that impacts right here. So this impacts first contentful paint and largest contentful paint. So suggesting some pre-connect options. So this is a good optimization that you can do. Resizing imagery, again, optimization. Here's some diagnostics, talking about, hey, script evaluation is taking quite a bit longer than might be expected. And then some, again, more impactful, actionable kind of specific things. Jump down to, and of course you'll have past audits, which is great. So you can look at these and say, okay, unused CSS is not a huge opportunity. We're doing quite good there, but there's a little bit of things we can do to impact that. On the best practices side, again, this is more about web best practices. So you can kind of dig into this. HTTPS, of course, is a signal from Google. And then in the SEO side, you'll have the mobile friendliness and kind of the robots.txt and indexability components as well. And some kind of content stuff, right? Making sure images have alt attributes so that the content can be exposed well. And then, of course, you'll have your progressive web app information in Lighthouse, which will give you good feedback on how to make your web app more of a progressive web app, talking about the specific elements like the manifest, having an icon in the manifest, being able to add it to home screen, and so on. At the bottom here, you'll see the runtime settings. So device was an emulated Moto G4, and the network and CPU were throttled to provide a more realistic experience. In addition to Lighthouse, and something I strongly recommend, especially if you have, or perhaps only if you have a large organization, lots of web developers working on one big complex website, maybe for the New York Times itself, for example, they may want to add Lighthouse as part of their continuous integration process so that, as folks make PRs, that Lighthouse can run, identify any regressions and say, hey, this change may have negatively impacted largest contentful paint, or you touched a bit of the code that impacts largest contentful paint, and there's an optimization opportunity you might want to take in as well. And so there's a good flow here for CI that is worth taking advantage of if you're that kind of if you're in an organizational setting in which that would be helpful. And I think it really is important to make sure that you're constantly thinking about how to keep performance top notch consistently, right? As you evolve your product, as you evolve your web application, because what you build today is not what will be there tomorrow, right? It's constantly growing as we learn more about our users and what they need and what they want. The open web platform also provides a set of APIs called performance APIs. I'm not going to dig into these too deeply, but I'll kind of give you an overview. And essentially, there are a set of APIs that you can use to kind of instrument performance in your web application. The performance timeline API, which has a performance observer, which can use to kind of track layout shift as an example, or other kinds of performance metrics. So as an example, I showed you that kind of timeline in Chrome DevTools. You can use these APIs to instrument specific spans of your web app to make sure that, to find outliers. Navigation timing API looks at how long things take to load. The user timing API looks at certain kinds of events from user interaction. The resource timing API, again, is part of this network thing, right? So you look at how long resources take to load and to execute. And then finally, another tool to note here is the Puppeteer CI. So you can use Puppeteer, which is kind of a headless Chrome, to do some CI functionality using these performance APIs. So you can say, hey, go to my actual live site, run this bit of JSON, this bit of JavaScript that actually, uses some of these performance APIs to instrument it. And so you can use Puppeteer in this way to do automated performance analyses or even manual performance analyses. Kind of in addition to Lighthouse CI, you can use a Puppeteer CI with these APIs. Additionally, there's the structured data testing tools. So I talked about kind of the schema.org bit, and schema.org has a schema markup validator, and then Google itself provides what's called a rich results test. And you can find that here on developers.google.com. And I'm going to go ahead and do a rich results test. And let's see if we can get kind of this New York Times bit in here. And you can choose, right? We'll always choose smartphone. We want to look at the mobile experience. And so we'll test the URL here. Now, the home page probably does not have an article JSON blob in it because it is not an article, but it may have a logo or company or something like that. So we'll see what the results come up here. And again, this is going to be loading the web page. It's going to be looking for any kind of structured data in the web page and exposing kind of opportunities. Okay, page not eligible for rich results. All right, let me pull up a specific article that's probably not a live one. Here we go. Try this one. That might be better. Go ahead and get that a load. And again, what this is going to be looking for is any particular structured data. And there's two ways that that's exposed: JSON LD and then microdata. JSON LD is kind of a JSON blob. I like it because it's distinct from the rest of the page. It doesn't clutter it up. Some people like the microdata because it uses HTML attributes. So the specific tags like the title and the H1 and the so on will have attributes. And so it kind of blends together or reduces duplication and makes the existing HTML more semantic. And so you'll see here we have 3 detected items of quote unquote rich results. The first one's article, and you can see here there's a warning, right? So we'll scroll down to what that warning is. It says there's a URL option for the author that you can add if you'd like. And you can see here that there's actually kind of nested structured data here. So at the top level, we have a news article, which contains within an image block, and there's multiple images here. Each one of this is an image object type, again, as defined by schema.org. And so there's person object, news media organization object as associated with the copyright holder. So it's a very structured kind of setup. There's also breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are kind of look at the sections. So here you can see this is a thing inside the Middle East list item, which is inside of the world list item, and that's our breadcrumbs, right? So you can imagine like a UI breadcrumb. You're in this set of sections on the website. You can expose that structure to Google that way. And then finally, it talks about the New York Times as a creative work, as a product. And so folks can, if there's a product kind of structured data component, you can kind of be part of that as well. Google Search Console, I've talked a bit about, and of course is definitely something you should be taking advantage of. And there's a lot that kind of goes in here. You can look at that indexability around coverage, sitemaps, and removals, making sure that there's no kind of technical misimplementations that are causing concerns. And then you can dig into experience as well, page experience, core web vitals, and mobile usability, as well as enhancements around kind of structured data. Well, that's all I have for you today. That's kind of a broad overview of core web vitals and SEO for web developers. And I'd love to take any questions folks may have, or just kind of hear your thoughts on kind of SEO and maybe, if anyone has anything to add or anything that they're curious to learn more about, I'd love to get a sense of that.
Okay, so let's look at some of the questions from our community. But first, there's a question from our team. Are those SEO approaches that you've discussed earlier, are those applicable only to Google search? Or they're also applicable to other engines like Bing, DuckDuckGo, etc.?
Right. So the structured data, so you remember I talked about a few different things, right? When I talk about SEO, I think about 4 components. I think about content, and ideally content is universal, right? Because content is, how useful is this information? How much information are we providing? How relevant is it to what the user is looking for? And so all search engines will be concerned with content. They'll all have different ways that they measure content and rank content options against each other for a given keyword. And so those specifics are going to be different. But if you're optimizing for content, frankly, you really shouldn't be paying too much attention to what Google does, because you should be paying attention to what your users want. And if what Google is trying to do is figure out, hey, how do we make sure we always give users what they want? And if that's what you're figuring out too, eventually you'll make sure that you're in the same place. The second bit is about indexability, things like sitemaps, removals, robots.txt, serving things correctly. If you have a redirect, redirecting correctly. If you do a site move, doing that technically correctly. And those are going to be the same. Those are very universal. So those considerations are going to be the same between DuckDuckGo, Google Search, Bing, Yandex, Naver, and other folks, Yahoo Japan. And then that third component was about kind of page experience signals, which is a lot of what I focused on today. And page experience signals are going to be necessarily different from each one. And to my knowledge, Google Search is really the one that's most concerned with these page experience signals. And so I'm not, I haven't checked in lately on how, or whether or not, Bing or Naver or Baidu are looking at these kinds of considerations. My guess is that if they are, they're probably looking at it in a similar way as Google Search. Again, you'll remember I talked a bit about the page experience history. A lot of the early days was Google trying to figure out kind of an opaque way, hey, how do we think about page experience? How do we incorporate page experience in ranking? It's a hard problem to solve, and many search engines will choose not to solve that problem, frankly, or I could think of it, consider it a step too far. Or if they are, they may choose to use the same set of generic signals that the Google Chrome team has provided that we call web vitals. So my guess is that they either aren't considering it at all, but if they are, they're probably using a lot of the same tools or resources that Google has. And if you're concerned with a specific engine, you can definitely reach out to them and say, hey, how do I make sure that I'm providing a page experience that you want for your users? And then that fourth bit is about search appearance. So structured data enables you to show up on specific feature sets in different search engines. And that's going to be different from every search engine to search engine, because it's very much relevant to the specific UI components they have on the page, other than those 10 blue links that are relevant to what they are searching for. And so that's going to be very different in terms of both what they support, but also what kind of integration they expect. Having said that, the schema.org standards body is kind of widely used by the semantic web community or the structured web community. And so I imagine a lot of other search engines, in fact, I know Bing, as an example, will use some scheme.org metadata. But it is not necessarily the case that they'll be using it in the same way, that they'll be looking at the same properties, that they have the same validation requirements, or even that they have the features available to take advantage of your structured recipe. And it may also be the case that you don't want to expose it, right? So you might say, hey, I'm a cookbook. I don't want to put my recipes on kind of the search engine results page. I want people to come to me and check out my recipes on my page. And so that consideration might be different for different search engines as well, depending on what kind of user interaction experience that they provide.
Okay, so there's a question from Norsalim. Are API interactions included there? Probably at the vitals.
Yeah. So when it comes to the core web vitals, there's the three that we talked about: cumulative layout shift, largest contentful paint, and then the first input delay. So cumulative layout shift, again, Jank on the page. If you tap something, right, and you have like an on-tap event listener that does an API request, and that API request maybe loads more information onto the page below it, and in a way that changes the layout of the page, then yeah, that network request is going to block the time it takes to do that layout change, and so that's going to affect the overall first input delay, right? So the amount of time it takes to respond to that first input. It can also impact layout shift if it causes a layout shift. But when it comes to largest contentful paint, it really looks at initial load time. And so you're looking kind of at your on-load listeners or any kind of script or link tags in your page or other parts of your page in your DOM that might impact any of those things, right? So if you have a script tag that pulls out, an SDK from somewhere, and that SDK has all these things that it adds to the DOM, and then that has like listeners, that trigger and cause other things to happen. Well, all of that is part of your kind of largest contentful paint. Anything that has to be completed from the initial point at which, your user navigates to your website to the point at which the paint is complete. So absolutely, network requests are often a huge part of that. And thinking about, deferring network requests, making them asynchronous, using CSS transitions or other techniques to kind of add tombstones or kind of, placeholders on the page to reduce layout shift. There are techniques that you can use to think about, hey, how are network requests impacting my web performance and my core web vitals? How do I, improve those? Is definitely network requests is going to be a huge part of that for sure.
Okay, so I do have a question though. Since splash screens sometimes are actually used, sometimes we use it to like dodge that vital or like is it beneficial or like will it have a negative effect on my search ranking?
Yeah, I think that there are beneficial ways to do splash screens. And then there are intrusive interstitials that look like splash screens. And so it's important to be cognizant of the considerations there. You can use these tools to make sure that you're looking at the same kinds of signals that Google is, right? So if you're using a splash screen, using the Lighthouse or the rendering tab in DevTools will enable you to look at the specific, the end-to-end experience and where the first contentful paint exists on the timeline, where the largest contentful paint exists on the timeline. And that's part of the reason why, frankly, we don't look at first contentful paint anymore. We look at largest contentful paint, right? Yeah. And historically, the consideration was really around first contentful paint because that seems like the most significant. But you can do things like splash screens, and it's not exactly correct, right? You're really concerned about, hey, the big part of my page, the most important part, when does that come into view? And when can the user really start consuming the content that's on the page? So I think that splash screens can be used to say to a user and signal to a user, hey, this page is still loading, but you're on the page. Relax, enjoy, it's coming, and that provides a good user experience. So I think splash screens are good. I think you can use splash screens for good. I think that you have to be cognizant of making splash screens effective and in consideration for what the user wants. And you can certainly use splash screens to reduce things like layout shift and reduce kind of time to first contentful paint. But I don't know that you can really make a meaningful difference on the largest contentful paint, which is the actual signal that's being used for ranking in this case.
Okay, so there's another question from Norcelin. Yes, a lot of questions. What are the best option tools out there? Since like you've provided like a lot of options, so like where's the best place to start, or like which tool should I use first?
Gotcha. Yeah, a great question. I try to give you a lot of everything so you kind of know where to go. But I would say the first place to start for sure, two tools I would point you out to begin with. The first one would be Google Search Console. Make sure that you've registered your domain, you have access to Google Search Console, you can go into the reports, just click around the reports, try and get an understanding of them. And then there'll be Core Web Vital drill down, right? So the nice thing about Google Search Console is it says, hey, here are all the URLs on your page. Here are the ones that are bad, and then you can pick a particular bad one and then go to that page and run Lighthouse. And Lighthouse will give you specific actionable things that you can do to improve the core web vitals for that page, and also other considerations like accessibility, like progressive web app functionality. So in summary, I would say the two most important options to think about when it comes to the tools, Google Search Console and Lighthouse. Go to Google Search Console, set up your page, pick one that's not performing well, go to that page, run Lighthouse, and that will get you started on optimizing for search engines.
Okay, so we have a question from Tristan. So can I win in first page without using any paid products, just pure SEO? Like, is it possible, or like?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you really like to pay for like magic stuff?
Well, there are lots of people out there who are willing to sell you all sorts of things, and some of them I'm sure are useful. I use a tool called ahrefs.co, which is kind of like Google Search Console, but it has a lot more data and signals, and so I can kind of, as an expert, dig in a little deeper. But it's not necessarily something that most people need. And there are a lot of folks out there selling things that are, what you might call black hat SEO, that are not necessarily ethical. And some of those can actually cause negative ranking signals from Google, right? Both via manual action and automated action. Google can tell when you're trying to game it, and the search engine can tell when you're trying to game it, and is not a fan of that. So if you're really concerned about being on that first page, you really want to think about the first three of those four things I talk about. Content is number one. You want to think about, hey, what does the user want when they're searching for this particular thing? Am I giving them the best information for that? And if the answer to that is no, then you shouldn't be on that page, right? And so really thinking about the content, thinking about the user. And there's a couple ways, I could spend a whole another hour on content easily. But if you want to kind of get started on content, a great place to go would be Google Search Rater Guidelines, which you can find online for free. And that is the set of, it's like a manual that Google gives to a group of individuals that they call search raters, which really kind of check what the algorithm is doing by manually reviewing pages and saying, okay, this piece of content is more relevant to this keyword or less relevant, or Google, the Google search kind of manual review process. And so understanding that will help you understand what are the kinds of things that Google thinks about when they think about, producing great content. And then, of course, when it comes to page experience, you don't need any paid tooling to do that. You can use a lot of the free resources that are out there. Google Search Console and Lighthouse, or Lighthouse is an open source tool provided by Google Chrome, and Google Search Console is a panel into the search index provided by Google Search itself. So I would say in general, you don't need any paid tools. There are some that are going to be helpful if you're kind of a deep expert and you want to dig in deeper. And there are lots of folks that will, sell you expertise, and maybe that's helpful. And then there are folks who will sell you things that are probably unethical and could possibly cause harm to your ranking when it comes to Google search.
I do have another question though. Like, do you have any recommended tools to automate the creation of those metadatas, like that especially like there are many types like articles, right? Sites, or movies. There's a lot. Like, as a web developer, are there any tools to like help me write? Because like, um, for others it would be easy because there's like a WordPress plugin for that. But for those other developers that needs to do the SEO optimizations, are there any tools to like help them, make it easier for them to just so that they can just fill in the blanks?
Yeah, I mean the short answer is no. I think if you're using a CMS, right, like WordPress or a blogging engine of any kind, that'll typically have kind of schema associated with it. But I assume the folks in this room are making their own websites and they're using their own technologies, and a lot of them are going to be using kind of progressive web apps, and some of them might be static site generating progressive apps, right? And so if you're looking at that, you have to look at, hey, where is the database wherein my information, my content is being kept, and then how do I, when I generate that HTML or generate either via an API or something, make sure that I generate the data, the structured data for that as well. So I don't know of any tooling around that specifically. I think it's going to be really use case independent, specific to your tech stack, your technology, what you're building with. And I think a lot of content management systems will have this baked in already. If not, you can find plugins easily. I'm sure Drupal and WordPress and others have plugins to do this kind of thing as well.
Okay, so let's have a few more questions before we end this talk. I think I'll just combine these two since the first question is SEO versus PPC, and this second question is, should I do SEO, run PPC ads, or both?
So they're related questions when it comes to, so for folks who don't know, PPC, pay-per-click ads, I assume you're referring to kind of those Google search ads.
Yeah.
And you can kind of think of it as, hey, we have the ability to bid on placement in that kind of ad section above the 10 blue links, as it were, to be able to show there. And I think the answer is you should do both, right? You should think about being placed in that section, and you should also think about in the organic section, the non-paid section, how do I, make sure that I'm making the most of that component and leveraging that the most. So I think you need to do both. When it comes to pay-per-click ads specifically, there are lots of different ways that you can, do that, and lots of different ways that you can bid on specific keywords. And Google will accept your search ad placement for lots of different keywords and queries that aren't necessarily useful, and frankly could result in, the nice thing about pay-per-click is you only pay when people click, but people can click on something and say, hey, this isn't for me, and then go back and look for something that's more relevant. And so I think it's important when you're doing pay-per-click ads to make sure that you're targeting relevant keywords. And if your content does a great job of being informative and useful for the user, and they appear in kind of those 10 blue links, then you don't have to worry too much about kind of placement in that ads section. Having said that, a lot of the consideration when it comes to placement in that ad section is, who are your users? What are their browsing habits? Not all users kind of, some users just instinctively skip the ad section. Some of them, see it as part of the results, and so they'll look at each one in sequence, even though they're labeled differently. They may see them as more relevant or equally relevant. And so you have to think about, who are my users? What are they searching for? How do I make sure that I'm producing great content, so also show up in the organic results for them? But also, how do I make sure that I'm competing in this kind of monetized ad specific section in ways that are relevant to me and to my users, which are not necessarily going to be something that I can tell you as a sort of general rule, you do X, Y, and Z. It's really depend on what works and what doesn't. And so my advice is to set a budget, put in your budget, experiment constantly, don't overgo your budget, because it's very easy to spend way more than you need to and get, diminishing returns. So I would say do both. And when you do the pay-per-click stuff, be conscious of making sure that you're doing it in a way that's effective and limited and within your budget.
Yeah. Okay, Michael, do you have any question?
No, I'm good, and I'm very happy to learn more about SEO. And what I learned about is that venturing into this technique wherein we wanted to bring our pages higher in search engines. It's not easy, and we need to learn more about this further. So thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's been great chatting with y'all.
Okay, so once again, thank you for sharing your knowledge to our community. We hope that we would be able to invite you once again in our future events. So before we end this, we end the session. So let's take a picture. Just like what we always do, we try to point our fingers in the middle of the frame. So mine is here.
Wait, hold on.
So the other side. Probably you are at the other side. Yeah.
There we go. There we go.
There you go.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, that's it. So let's just count 1, 2, 3. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay. So we'll just take a screenshot of that, and yeah, like right. So it feels like we're connected even though we're so far away. Like it's morning in there. We're gonna go to sleep after this most probably. Yeah. Hopefully we could invite you here in the Philippines.
Well, hopefully this COVID thing, it might be a little while, but I'm sure this COVID thing will die down. I'll come over to the Philippines and get to say hello to y'all. You guys in Manila?
Yes, we're at Manila. Though we have audiences from all over the Philippines actually.
That's great.
So yeah. Yeah, I guess let's go through some of the shout outs. So this is from PUP Maragondon, Krisha May. Hello. Joshia Kyle, good evening.
Good evening, Joshia.
Angela, yeah, good evening, and shout out to those from Eastern Samar State University. It's down south, so yeah. Sel Yun, as well, good evening and good morning to Sir Jordan.
Good morning.
Wow. Good evening from Albert Tan. Is here as well. Kenneth is here as well. Good evening. Gabriel John, good evening. So just for them to be acknowledged. Okay, so who else has a shout out? Anyway, they're saying thank you now. So Albert says thank you. Tristan says thank you as well. Kisha is saying thank you as well. Nor Salim said he learned a lot today.
That's great.
Definitely enjoyed that. Okay, so wow, there's a lot of there's Joe says wow. Selyun says thank you as well. Nor Salim says more thanks. Albert Tan from Cavite. Joshia says thank you, sir. There you go. They're mostly from college. They're still in college, but yeah, they're very active and wanted to learn. Yeah, there's another one from good evening from Udemy University. Yeah.
The lifelong university.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do have JB as well. I guess they're are they blockmates? All of them. So they're saying thank you. So definitely they enjoyed the talk. So JD as well. So yeah, I guess that's it. So once again, thank you, Sir Jordan, for waking up early and being with us. I know it's hard, but it's the most convenient time.
So, it was my pleasure. Thank you all so much, and I'm glad it was helpful. And I look forward to coming back.
Definitely. Thank you. So yeah.
Again.
Yeah. Okay, so before we end the program, we're just going to invite everyone to that we still do have remaining talks on the 28th if you still wanted to learn about the web in general. So we still have real-time web application with SignalR and containerized deployment for your SPA and API. So if you wanted to rewatch this talk, if you want to revisit some of the discussions, it'll be on our PWA Pilipinas progressive web app that's available at app.pwapilipinas.org. It's on Google Play and on Microsoft Store. We're on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Gmail. We have a site, and thank you to our sponsor AWS for providing us with shirt. Also to our community partners that has been very helpful in sharing our events: OmniQuotient, Angel Hack, React.js Philippines, Google Developer Student Club, AMA Computer College, Caloocan. Thank you to everyone. Algo Filipino, Angular Philippines, PhilIT.org, Computer Professionals Union, and Upper.ph for sponsoring our 1 year of StreamYard so that we can stream to Twitter and YouTube and Facebook. So, if you want to volunteer, if you want to help us, send us an email. And for our partners, they do have events as well. For OmniQuotient, if you want a community where you could post your code or ask questions about programming, they do have that. So just visit OmniQuotient. The New Energy Nexus Hackathon happening very soon. Check our Facebook page for that. Angular Meetup. Recently, I was there yesterday. I gave a talk, and we also have on the 28th, we have Santosh Yadav that will be giving a talk about getting productive with Angular. Wow. Okay, so there's also a modern data app. Can you invite Michael?
Okay, so you're all invited to join the Build a Modern Data App Hackathon by DataStax in Engine Hack, happening on September 3 to 5. Visit bit.ly/pwa-filipinas.ph for more information.
Okay, and we also have space apps, Michael.
So once again, you're also invited to join the hackathon of NASA this 10th year anniversary called Space Apps Challenge, happening on October 2 to 3. Visit spaceapps.co for more information.
Okay, 10 years of space apps. And we also have a PWA Summit coming very soon, October 6th and 7th. Make sure to visit that if you wanted to learn about PWA. The speaker and topic lists are already there, so it's free. And if you wanted to learn more about PWA, just visit pwasummit.org. Yeah, so we want your feedback. How was the talk? Did you enjoy it? Make sure to fill up this form, bit.ly/PWA-form. Make sure to fill that up with your full name so that we can provide you with an e-certificate for this talk. Yeah, and aside from that, if you fill that up, you would be able to join the raffle tomorrow for this very exclusive PWA Pilipinas and AWS shirt. Yeah, we will be giving one winner per draw. We had the draw last time, and we will still have another one tomorrow and on the 29th. So make sure to fill the form. Yeah, and for the winner recently we have Krisha, congrats, and Christopher as well for the goodies. So congrats, and that's it. Okay, so it's already nighttime and morning, morning in the US. So I guess let's end this now so that we can take a break or do something else. So once again, I'm Radicito de Guzman, the community lead for PWA Pilipinas, and
my name is Michael Lance from PWA Pilipinas. And
okay, yeah, and I guess that's it. Bye.
Okay, goodbye.
Cloud computing is the on-demand delivery of IT resources via the internet, with pay-as-you-go pricing. Instead of buying, owning, and maintaining physical data centers and servers, you can access technology services such as computing power, storage, and databases on an as-needed basis from a cloud provider like Amazon Web Services. Organizations of every type, size, and industry are using the cloud for a wide variety of use cases, such as data backup, disaster recovery, email, virtual desktops, software development and testing, big data analytics, and customer-facing web applications. For example, healthcare companies are using the cloud to develop more personalized treatments for patients. Financial services companies are using the cloud to power real-time fraud detection and prevention. And video game makers are using the cloud to deliver online games to millions of players around the world. With cloud computing, your business can become more agile, reduce costs, instantly scale, and deploy globally in minutes. Cloud computing gives you instant access to a broad range of technologies so you can innovate faster and build nearly anything you can imagine. From infrastructure services such as compute, storage, and databases, to Internet of Things, machine learning, data analytics, and much more. You can deploy technology services in a matter of minutes and get from idea to implementation several orders of magnitude faster than before. This gives you the freedom to experiment and test new ideas to differentiate customer experiences and transform your business, such as adding machine learning and intelligence to your applications in order to personalize experiences for your customers and improve their engagement. You don't need to make large upfront investments in hardware and overpay for capacity you don't use. Instead, you can trade capital expense for variable expense and only pay for IT as you consume it. With cloud computing, you access resources from the cloud in real time, as they're needed. You can scale these resources up and down to grow or shrink capacity instantly as your business needs change. Cloud computing also makes it easy to expand to new regions and deploy globally in minutes. For example, Amazon Web Services has infrastructure all over the world, so you're able to deploy your application in multiple physical locations in just a few clicks. Putting applications in closer proximity to end users reduces latency and improves their experience. No matter your location, size, or industry, the cloud frees you from managing infrastructure and data centers so you can focus on what matters most to your business.